All right, guys. Bittersweet. We're on our last chapter here, talking about the role of the producer. I think it's going to be short and sweet. I know that you have final projects that you're wrapping up with me and other classes, so I don't think that this will take up much of your time, but it's always good information to know. It's always very interesting to me, but maybe it's because I've been in the theater world my entire life. But I find that people are always very surprised at how much it costs to put up a show. They don't think about it, or they think it costs much less. I just have been finding recently that I'm running into that issue a lot, and so I think it's good for everybody to be knowledgeable of really how much money and how much time, blood, sweat, and tears goes into putting up a production. All right. All of the artists of the theater might create a wonderful play and production, but providing the funding, getting all of these artists together, finding an appropriate audience, and performance space and promoting the productions usually falls to a producer, a collection of producers, or a producing and promotional organization. Early producers. Just as someone has usually been in charge of the performance of a play, someone has typically been in charge of producing a play or managing a theater company. In ancient Greece, the civic government and religious priests coordinated the production of plays with an annual spring festival honoring the god Dionysus. Rome often had a manager in charge of the acting company. And many professional companies from the 16th century on in Europe, America, China, and Japan had a company manager who was sometimes an actor, like Molière in France, or a financial manager like Philip Henslow in England, or a playwright like Li Yu in China. The role of the producer. The person who is most responsible for getting an audience and show together is the producer, the person in charge of all financial aspects of production. In nonprofit theaters, the job title is often managing director. Whatever the title, the producer must collaborate with theater artists as well as the general public. The job requires finely developed organizational and persuasive skills as well as a thorough understanding of finance. Producing responsibilities may be taken on by one person or they may be shared by a group. Producing in commercial theater. An independent commercial production such as Broadway or off-Broadway shows typically begin with a producer. This position has a long history, but the current commercial producer is often based on a 19th century model. A commercial producer finds a play. He sometimes finds a playwright or director working on a script and actively seeks or sometimes a playwright or director working on a script actively seeks out a producer. If the producer believes in the play and thinks it likely to make a profit, he or she may secure production rights to the play. Money must then be raised to cover the cost of staging the production. Many backers may be brought on board, each contributing a significant amount to fund the pre-production work. Backers must be convinced that the show is likely to run long enough to earn back the initial outlay. The producer must find both rehearsal and performance space. Some modern producing organizations own their own theater, but many rent available commercial spaces. The producer hires and can fire all personnel connected with the show, but normally collaborates with the director in engaging leading actors and designers. Negotiations must take place with different unions for each aspect of production, and the producer must weigh the cost of talent needed to produce a fine show against the need to keep the production costs as low as possible. The producer hires the show's director, sometimes through a theatrical agent. Agents usually represent directors, actors, and other theater artists and can serve as an important connection between artists and producers. Although most artists' control rests with the director, the producer controls the purse strings and therefore maintains a certain amount of artistic power. The producer is answerable to the backers and so must try to keep the production within budget as well as meet a payroll and keep adequate financial records. Ultimately responsible for creating an audience for the show, the producer oversees marketing and publicity. In commercial theater, the producer typically works with a public relations firm. Marketing and publicity include designing and distributing posters and billboards, writing and distributing news releases and direct mail campaigns, producing TV and radio commercials, and serving as a liaison with the media. Given the enormous financial risk, producers often look for shows that have been highly successful at an earlier time or in other countries. A successful Broadway show runs as long as it is making money. For the 2006-2007 season, 12.31 million people attended Broadway shows in New York and paid $939 million in admission, an average of $76.27 per ticket. The producers often have a close relationship with theater owners in the Broadway sphere. In fact, they are sometimes part of the same organization. As of May 2006, there were 39 active Broadway theaters. Of this number, the Schubert Organization owns 17. The Niederlander Organization, now for 3 generations in the same family, owns 9. And the Jujamissen Theater owns 5. All 3 organizations produce, but their theaters also present plays produced by others. Some individual producers over time have created large organizations of their own. For example, Cameron Mackintosh in London has produced many blockbuster musicals since the 1970s, such as Cats, Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables, and more recently Mary Poppins, that originated in Britain before arriving on American shores. Sometimes film companies get involved with theater producing in the hopes that a successful show will then become a movie. New Line Cinema, for example, produced Hairspray, and Universal Studios co-produced Wicked. Producing in nonprofit theater. Some directors, typically having worked in the field, now I can't see, for a period of time, assume the great responsibility of heading up an entire producing organization. Most professional nonprofit resident theaters, those that have a permanent home and produce a season of plays, are led by an artistic director who has a primary responsibility for the artistic life of the theater. Although in nonprofit theater, the artistic director is responsible for the theater's artistic mission, he or she usually works closely with the managing director. This team must focus on the continuity of the organization rather than a specific show. Casting and design choices must take the entire season into consideration, and although all shows will have a particular budget assigned, the entire season must stay within a larger budget as well. Along with taking care of publicity and marketing, an audience development staff may also coordinate special outreach programs to bring in new audience members and to help current patrons stay involved in the life of the theater. Tickets are often sold at reduced rates to large groups, special backstage tours are arranged, guest speakers are provided for group functions, and special promotions may be offered for specific shows or days of the week. In a resident theater, the artistic director frequently makes this final decision on plays to be done and directors and designers to be hired. Whereas the director of a production is responsible for the outcome of a particular show, the artistic director must think about the season as a whole. Is there variety? Is the theater serving its sorry, it's a separate word and my eyes are going cross-eyed. Is the theater serving its constituency well? Are the productions meeting the artistic goals of the theater? Artistic directors may work closely with a board of directors, a committee of artists, civic leaders, and business people from the community who are typically generous supporters of the theater. Although most directors have some responsibility for overseeing the business aspects of the organization, these duties may be shared with a managing director and/or executive director or company manager. Artistic directors usually direct one or more of the productions each season. Many artistic directors achieve national and international renown by sharing important productions beyond their home theaters. Artistic direction can be very demanding and frustrating over time, and many successful artistic directors have returned to freelance directing and sometimes faculty positions in university theaters. Thought that was interesting. Resident theaters are very concerned about the graying of American audiences as electronic media preoccupy potential young audiences. The Cleveland Playhouse in Ohio is addressing the situation by offering an impressive array of classes and workshops for youth and children, student matinees of regular productions, children's theater performances on weekend afternoons, even playwriting workshops for high school students, and a 6-week camp for students to participate in creative drama and theatrical production. A number of resident theaters have become proactive in expanding theatrical education and building theater audiences for the future. Producing in amateur theater. In amateur theater, the producing duties are often shared by a number of people. In a large educational theater, department, or community theater, producing may be primarily the responsibility of an administrator, the department chairperson, for example, or an executive director. In those theaters, the producer's major concern is for the overall health of the organization. In small theaters, the duties are assumed by a number of people, many of whom may be volunteers. Working on publicity, fundraising, or public relations committees is a way for people with strong organizational and communication skills to support the theater. The economics of theater. The live nature of theater creates one of its biggest challenges: financing. A film can be copied thousands of times and distributed to movie theaters, video stores, and private homes. It begins earning its money once the creative work is complete. Theatrical performance, however, must be recreated every night for a particular audience. The show needs its actors, technicians, and other staff until it closes. Unlike film, the product cannot be resold. It is intangible and cannot be held in the hand, but constantly must be created anew. Consequently, the immediacy of the theatrical experience sometimes comes at a high price. Production costs. In amateur theater, the initial outlay for a production includes a royalty fee paid to the playwright, the cost of materials for sets and costumes, the cost of technical equipment that must be purchased or rented, advertising costs, as well as the salaries of professional staff hired to lead and guide the volunteers. In addition, a professional production must pay all company members, directors, designers, technicians, actors, ticket sellers, and others, most of whom are unionized. Any organization that has its own space must pay for upkeep and repairs, as well as all utilities. A show with no home base will need to pay the owner of the performance space for its use. Since the early 20th century, production costs have escalated much faster than the rate of inflation. In the 1920s, most first-run professional productions of Broadway plays could be staged for about $10,000 to $20,000, but many were done for much less. A typical outlay for a non-musical with 3 or more sets was about $14,000. In the early 21st century, however, even a simple single-set show with 2 or 3 actors can cost from $800,000 to $1 million to get to opening night on Broadway, the most expensive of the professional venues. Musicals are even more expensive to produce because of typically large casts, multiple sets, hundreds of costumes, more extravagant lighting, and payment for extra personnel, a music director, composer, lyricist, and choreographer. The musical Wicked in 2003 reportedly cost $14 million to stage. Wicked, still running in 2008, cost more than $600,000 per week to maintain. Off-Broadway musicals are obviously less expensive, but still risky. Playbill estimates that most of these smaller musicals cost about $1 million to open and $50,000 to $100,000 per week to keep running. Theaters in smaller cities with lower overheads still struggle with climbing production costs. Out of 92 nonprofit theaters that participate in an ongoing theater communications group survey, a slim majority reported running in the red in 2003. Unfortunately, most theatrical productions do not earn a profit. A more likely scenario is for a show to close before it has time to recoup the producer's original investment. 8 out of 10 shows on Broadway fail. Perhaps the most infamous Broadway flop is the musical Carrie, based on the novel by Stephen King, which closed after only 5 performances in 1988 and lost $8 million. Effect on types of plays produced. Because of prohibitive production costs, many commercial producers are hesitant to invest money in a show that might close quickly. So they opt for what they believe will prove to be a major box office draw. The result has been a narrowing of material on Broadway and other commercial venues to mostly safe plays that are likely to appeal to a mass audience. Large cast spoken word plays are very difficult to get produced, since the chances are great that the show will not earn a profit and might not even break even. Producers sometimes sign on recognizable film and television actors who also may have extensive stage experience in an attempt to ensure full houses, but this practice often limits the show's run. In effect, commercial theater tends to consist of musicals, which, if successful, produce a high return on investment, comedies, and the occasional unusual serious play, usually with one set and small cast that has proven successful in other venues. For the most part, production of pre-20th century dramatic literature presents too high a risk in the commercial world and is carried on by resident theaters and educational theaters. Artistic experimentation happens in resident and educational theaters as well as off-Broadway and some non-traditional companies scattered across North America, but is increasingly difficult to fund. Nonprofit theaters find that programming traditional crowd pleasers is important if they are to bring in the funds to keep the theater functioning. In difficult economic times, the numbers of such shows that are necessary to pay the expenses often crowds out more difficult. But exciting work. All right. Theater funding. A dependence on box office receipts severely limits the options available for an audience. Many important, thought-provoking plays have been artistic but not commercial successes. Government funding for the arts has been more difficult to sustain in the United States. The National Endowment for the Arts, NEA, founded in 1965, is a public agency of the federal government dedicated to supporting excellence in the arts, both new and established, bringing the art to all Americans and providing leadership in arts education." Unquote. As the largest single funder of nonprofit arts organizations in the United States, the NEA supports arts education and preservation as well as the development of new projects. The effect on the audience. Rapidly rising production costs have driven ticket prices up. In 1920, the highest priced Broadway ticket for spoken word productions was $2. Musicals usually charged no more than $2.50 per ticket, and by the end of the economic boom of the 1920s, the top price was still usually under $4. By contrast, a ticket to a Broadway show in 2008 might range from $20 to $35 for standing room or student rush to about $90 to $120 for the best seats. Even nonprofit theaters find themselves passing unsubsidized costs on to the consumer. Theatergoer in 2008 might have expected to pay anywhere from a low of $23 to $30 to a high of $75 to $95 to see a show at a major resident theater. When you read this, ticket costs may be even higher. I have a note, and I think I talked about this in my last lecture, that we're going to see Hamilton, my mom, my sister, and I, and we just paid $250 each for tickets. So it has gone up considerably since they wrote this book. A regrettable byproduct of high ticket prices is a narrowing of the potential audience to those individuals with discretionary income. An awareness of the prohibitive nature of ticket prices has led to a number of steps, even in commercial venues, to make tickets affordable to a wider audience. The Theater Development Fund, TDF, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting new productions and broadening the audience for the performing arts, offers discount programs to increase the number of potential theater goers in New York City. Still, the cost of professional theater, whether commercial or nonprofit, makes it unavailable to many people. How can live theater be made more accessible to a wider audience? The question is difficult, but answering it will be vital to the theater's future. Theater and the community. Besides the more intangible contributions that theater can make to a community, studies have shown that a lively art scene is healthy for a city's economy. According to the Theater Communications Group, in 2006, there were 1,893 not-for-profit professional theaters in the United States that mounted 14,000 productions seen by 30.5 million people. Also, nonprofit theaters contributed $1.67 billion to the U.S. economy in the form of salaries, benefits, and payments for goods and services. Looking at the broader economic impact on an area, for 2006 to 2007, the Broadway theater industry alone contributed $5.1 billion to the economy of New York City and created 44,000 full-time jobs. Theater audience members tend to patronize restaurants and bars, parking facilities, and public transportation. Performance events serve as major tourist attractions and can even be part of urban renovation designed to bring people back to the city after working hours. The new 42nd Street, a nonprofit development created in New York between 1995 and 2000, is a successful collaboration of theater artists, government, and corporate America. A decrepit neighborhood in Times Square was renovated, resulting in several new theaters: the New Victory, the New Amsterdam, that's Disney's theater, and the American Airlines Theater, emerging from run-down ones. The result was new homes for family and children's theater and for the Roundabout Theater Company, as well as rehearsal studios and a much safer, revitalized entertainment block in New York. Such community collaboration benefits not only the urban environment, but the performing arts in a vital way. This block has emerged as a magnet for young audiences. The relationship between any society and its theater is complex and ever-changing. A frequently repeated argument for arts funding is that societies of the past speak to us mainly through the works of art that they left behind. Theater leaves only clues, but important ones: play scripts, reviews, theater buildings, personal accounts and letters, diaries and periodicals, stories handed down by word of mouth, paintings, and, more recently, photographs and videos. The reconstruction of theater from the past gives us a fascinating perspective on the culture that produced it. Theater in the present serves its community in many ways. No matter what the venue, no matter what the ticket price, it can serve as a vibrant means of human communication. But bam, you finished this whole book in a semester. Good job. But seriously, it has been an honor to work with all of you guys, and you are in my thoughts as you getting ready to submit final projects and take your exams next week. Get sleep, don't cram, breathe, and definitely go celebrate. All right, thanks guys.